For context purposes, I was a freshman in high school at the time, so I was maybe 14 or 15. Our Neckbeard was 18, almost 19, and a senior in the same school. Warning in advance in case, the later part of the story does involve some potentially sensitive events. So this school takes place around 2014-2015, when I was a freshman in high school. At the time, was very socially awkward and struggled to get along and make friends. Most of my time spent was drawing, writing, or watching YouTube and anime. I was also part of several clubs involving art, video games, and anime, and to the point, I was chubby, and not exactly attractive, and you can imagine me as the unattractive, awkward, anime-loving dweeb I was. Now, it's important to mention I did have one small group of friends who were, at least to say, not the best influences for me, but friends nonetheless. It is through one of them I met our Neckbeard, who I will call Mike in this. Mike and I had seen each other sparingly during the first few months of school and clubs, specifically the Anime and Video Games Club. We never spoke much unless the club initiated a conversation topic where we might end up talking. I never thought much of Mike at the time. He was tall, and although not fat per se, he did definitely carry a belly and smell of Axe body spray and Doritos. Mike even had the full-blown neckbeard and greasy hair that needed a good trim. But at the time I had no idea what a neckbeard was, nor the trouble I was about to find myself in. One day during lunch, a friend at my table, let's call her Mary, invites Mike over to the table to sit with us. Our table was a bit cramped, but one of our usual spots was free since someone from the group was sick that day. It just so happened that seat was with me, so Mike ended up beside me. Other than his smell, I was unbothered. Mike did not talk much, and this repeated for a few weeks, where Mike would find a spot at the table, typically next to me if possible. Because of sitting so close to me, and Mike began to talk more. At first it was casual, but soon we began to talk about clubs, and get into things we liked, such as anime and games. After maybe a week of us really talking, Mike asks my phone number. At the time I did not have a phone, but I was going to get one within the few months. So I had him send me a friend request through Facebook, so we can talk when I was home and on my laptop. Mike and I continued to communicate after this at school, in clubs, and when I was at home. I never had any big problems with Mike, although there were a few warning signs I had noticed. Mike would sometimes talk a bit much about anime that involved lolly characters, or girls who seemed to be younger and dressed very cutesy. Although this is not a bad thing, it was how he talked about these girls, calling them sometimes sexy, or saying he wanted a girlfriend who would dress that way around him, who he could play with. He also had a lot of photos on his phone of fan art of female game characters in lewd outfits, and he often raved on about their attire. But back to the story. By now, Mike and I have been talking for several weeks, and soon I get my phone and he asks for my number. At first I was hesitant since I did not like to be called much, but I eventually give in and give him my text number and tell him I prefer he not text me during class or super late at night, since I did not like missing my hours of sleep to text or message people. After this, we separate to go to class, and just as things get going, I happened to check my phone for the time and found several messages from Mike. I was a bit annoyed he messaged me during class after I just said not to, but let it slide since I thought, okay, not that big of a deal. I look at the messages and see Mike is wanting to talk about some anime and games, and he wanted to know if I wanted to hang out after school near the lunchroom to talk. I told him no because I had plans that day, but maybe we could talk another time. Mike seemed to accept that answer and did not ask again, but he did keep messaging me in class. For the next few days, Mike would ask me to meet up after school, and I usually said no for one reason or another, ranging from I was actually busy, or I just did not want to stay. I wanted to go home. After him pestering still over the weekend, I finally gave in and decided we can meet up after school that week on a day I had to stay for a club we were not both in, my art club. When the day rolls around, Mike followed me constantly during the day, wanting to talk every moment I had free. I had brought a sketchbook with me, and he asked me to see it. Knowing I was an art student, I personally do not like people touching my sketchbooks, so I may seem protective of them. That's because in the past I dealt with many people who ruined my work by being too rough with my pages or wiping their hands all over the pages, so when I told Mike no, he got offended and pestered me until I let him. He ended up talking about how every girl I made needed bigger boobs, or how I should draw girls he liked in thin outfits. Skipping to the end of the day, we meet up in the lunchroom, and Mike is there with flowers and flour. I have no idea where he had those all day, but several were crushed, so I'm guessing he just stuffed them in his bag. Having a bad feeling in my gut, I got up to Mike, and he asked me out. With people still around, he said he thought I was cute, and had been wanting to ask me out for a few weeks. I at first was not sure what to say. My gut said no, but I had never dated yet, so the giddy teen girl in me felt happy someone confessed to me, so I of course said yes, and we spent the next few hours together in my club. For a short moment I was comfortable, but that did not last long, of course. Mike quickly wanted to get moving in on relationships. He would immediately call me babe, and always grab my hands in his in a tight grip that often hurt. When we would sit together, he would often put his hands on my thigh, and more than once smacked my butt as we were going up the stairs to classes. Again, I'm like 14 and he's almost 19. I let all of this slide, but it did make me uncomfortable. I had been sexually assaulted a few years before, so I was uneasy about guys touching me without my consent. I thought to myself, maybe this is how relationships are? And I told myself it was okay, it just meant Mike really liked me. The breaking point is when Mike tried to kiss me. All this happened in less than 3 weeks, so I personally felt I was not ready to kiss. Mike had become increasingly physical with me and had tried to hint at kissing several times up to this. Each time I made sure he would only kiss the top of my head, but when he was getting to a point he would almost push me up against walls in the corner of the halls. Each time made me very uncomfortable, so this was the last straw. After lunch on that day, Mike and I went up to our classes slowly, the halls mostly empty by the time we got up. I got ready to leave when Mike pushed me up against a wall so hard. I told Mike to let go, and his response was to force his lips on mine and pin me back. He ended up shoving his tongue in my mouth and grabbed me so hard I found bruises form after. Panicked and having fear from the past rise up, I started to cry, and Mike let go after several long moments. I shoved Mike over and told him not to talk to me for the rest of the day, and before I got out of the way fully, I felt his hand smack my butt hard, a smile on his face when I looked back. I dried my eyes and went on with my day after. Mike messaged me non-stop from then through the night how I had to like his kiss because it was clear I loved him, and how I made cute faces like some lolly girls from his animes did. Mike would try and kiss me every day after, began to follow me and text and call non-stop. After a week of this, I told my friends, including Mary, the girl who first brought Mike over. I told them about how Mike would treat me and how he was constantly getting sexual with me. Everyone at the table was unsure until I showed them the texts, and Mike happens to arrive during all this. Everyone at the table began to bash Mike about how he was being super creepy and basically sexually harassing me. Mike began to say I wanted him, and I wanted these things, and it was all consensual. Thankfully, we ended our relationship then and there, with me being the one to cut it off. Mike continued to talk to me after this, even when I told him to leave me alone and blocked his number. His last act was right before he graduated. He gave me a gift bag, a large one at that. I was afraid to look at what might be inside, so I had a friend open it for me after Mike left. Inside was one of those keyhole sweaters that showed a lot of cleavage and was short with an open back. There was also a lacy thong with flowers and another with bunny ears. Inside was a note to send him photos since he still loved me. Safe to say he did not get any photos, and the friend of mine actually took the clothes herself, which I was more than fine with.